In the morning when I rise, give me Jesus.
Good morning. Yesterday, we saw Jesus heal a guy with dropsy. That could be heart failure. That's a pretty serious deal. And so, Jesus said, can I heal him on the Sabbath? Would that be legal? Of course, he did heal him on the Sabbath because he said, oh my goodness, if you had an ox or even your son were to fall into a well, would you pull him out? Absolutely. It's legal to do good on the Sabbath. And so we see that Pharisees didn't know what to say about that. They didn't like it, but it certainly kept them silent for a while. This was at a Pharisee's house. So who do you think the Pharisee invited to be there with Jesus for this luncheon? We see in verses 7 through 11 in chapter 14 of Luke what's going on here. Jesus began speaking a parable to the invited guests. So if it was a Pharisee's house, it was probably Pharisees that were there. And look at what Jesus noticed. When he noticed how they had been picking out the places of honor at the table, and so he said to them this parable. It was Pharisees. We know that the Pharisees are very prideful. And so they went and sat at the front of the table, and Jesus said this, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, do you take the place of honor? For someone more distinguished than you may have been invited by the host. And so he who has invited you both will come and say to you, give up your place to this man. And then, in disgrace, you proceed to occupy the last place. You remember a couple days ago, Jesus said the last will be first and the first will be last. And I said, I'm not sure what that means, but it may be that the Jewish people who were the first to be declared the children of God, many of them may not make it to the kingdom, and yet Gentiles who are not chosen as the children of God would be first, would come to the kingdom. Well, maybe that was it, or maybe he was setting us up for this parable. Because you can see, he said that the host will come and say, come take the last place. Well, verse 10, but when you are invited, go and recline at the last place, so that when the one who has invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will have honor in the sight of all those who are at the table with you. See, when you humble yourself, then you get exalted. And that's what Jesus says here in verse 11. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled. But he who humbles himself will be exalted. Now that's not a lesson that the world will teach you, but that is the way things work in the kingdom of God. We saw it in James. James said this. It's in James chapter 4, and verse 10 says this, humble yourselves in the presence of the Lord, and the Lord will exalt you. Oh, pride is in the way of receiving the love of God. But you come to God with humility, and he will love on you and lift you up and proclaim you his child, doting over you because he is so pleased and delighted with who you are in him. God bless you as you humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, that he would lift you up. Come sit at the head table with me. That's what God's saying to every believing believer. I look forward to being with you tomorrow. Let's see what Jesus says when we get together then. I'll see you tomorrow.
Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. You can have all this world. Give me Jesus.